Welcome to Pep Talks with Eric, where we shift gears from negative feedback loops and drive towards the life we truly want. I'm your host, Eric Ayers. I believe in the power of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Together, we'll explore how connections fuel our growth and create amazing experiences. In this podcast, we'll tune out the noise of the world and tune into what we really want and what really matters. All right, guys, thank you for joining us for another episode of Pep Talks with Coach Eric. I'm your host, Coach Eric, and today's an exciting one. We have an Olympic athlete joining us who I had the privilege of meeting at the end of last year. And his genuine kindness, his ability to storytell, and his energy through lived experiences, his ability to take that and create within you the ability to follow that journey and to come out with an understanding of, wait a minute, there's more to life than what's in front of us. And I have the power to do that. I mean, I heard him tell stories to kids and I left change for that. And so at that moment, we were starting to identify that, hey, we're going to start this podcast. And Josh was actually the first person that I said, hey, I want you to be on the podcast. And he graciously said yes. So without further ado, Josh Watson, thank you so much for joining us, man.
My pleasure, Eric. It's a pleasure to have known you for a short period of time, and look forward to seeing what we can uncover.
Awesome. So, and I do too, man. I'm every time we speak, we go pretty deep. So I'm excited for this. If you don't mind, share with the listeners kind of like your Olympic journey. We'll start there.
So I was born in Australia, in Sydney, or not far from Sydney, Australia. And before I was, I think, 1 year of age, Mum and Dad moved about 500 miles north, and just grew up on a coastal town, a beautiful small town that was just, we were literally backed onto a saltwater lake. There was, rivers and beach, and the climate was beautiful, which, led to, backyard pools everywhere. So I just being around water, led to learn to swim, just purely for survival's sake, which is pretty common in Australia, and hated it. And more than, like, I was terrified, genuinely terrified of, the pool, my coach. I literally couldn't stand on the edge of the deep end. And so that was my entry into swimming. And at the time, obviously the goal was to, provided I can survive, that's it. I didn't want to have anything to do with it long term. And just by a couple of chance situations where, a good coach joined the program, I had a couple of good mates that we were in the same school. We competed at everything that we possibly could. And the only sport that I could beat them in was swimming. So that was enough of a decision to start doing more of it. And that led to, being a really good sort of age group swimmer up to about 11 or 12 years of age. I was ranked in the, top couple in the country. But I was always like a skinny, not necessarily short, but just a real wiry sort of kid. And so, when, all the other boys started to develop, I got left behind. And I look back at that time, and I could have quit any day of the week. I couldn't win my school championship. There was only 30 other boys to beat. I would come 9th at a regional meet or 12th at a state meet and just always miss. And I remember going to a national age titles, and as a 13-year-old, again, as a 12-year-old, when you're highly ranked, you go into that meet pretty confident. And I would say I was cocky as a young kid, and there's reasons as to why that was the case. Maybe we talk about a little bit about that later. But I came out of that meet like incredibly discouraged and just disappointed, because I'd gone back over 40 places in 12 months, and not because I wasn't a great trainer or didn't apply myself or cut corners. It's just because I got left behind physically. And my coach gave me advice that day. And it's interesting when you come to America and, I guess the opportunity is the scale of the opportunity is so much greater. And I think that leads itself to being in a hurry to reach that pinnacle too quick. And, so I got up out of the pool that day, and I remember walking up into the bleachers, and I was so scared of looking at mum or my coach in the eye, because I knew what was inside. I could tell there's a whole lot of emotion here that's going to come out. And so I looked at my coach and just burst into tears and sat in between mum and Greg for, I don't know how long it was. And the advice that I was given that day, which honestly is, I can contribute that to the rest of my swimming career, was my coach said to me, "Josh, no one remembers an age group champion." And I had no idea what he meant in the moment. I was still well and truly in my own miserable state. But over the next sort of 12 months, I started to understand the patience that he was trying to instill in me. And that's because I was doing enough of the right things well and consistently. And so 12 months later, same competition, I came fourth. 12 months later, again, for the next 3 years, I was a national age champion. And that 3-year window was the springboard to 8 years on the national team, 2 Olympic Games, Olympic silver medal. I'm Australia's first male backstroke world champion. And it's taken me a long time to appreciate what I actually achieved, because, anyone who does an Olympic sport wants to be a gold medalist. So the ruthlessness of your own view of yourself when you don't achieve something like that it's not just, oh, I missed it. It's complete and utter failure. High performance people can be sometimes so cruel to themselves, where you can get so close. You can get 99% of the way, and you may as well not have even got any part of the way. So yeah, I mean, that's my swimming career, and it taught me so much, and gave me a lot of confidence as well. But all good things have to come to an end, and when it did, I felt like a child again. Like I felt like someone who had no experience, and most athletes go through some sort of transition from sport, and their life falls apart, and maybe mine didn't fall apart to the degree that some do, but certainly from an internal perspective, it did for sure.
Oh, amazing. And I know there's so much left out, because I mean, this is decades, right, of time spent. And one of the things that highlighted in my mind as you're sharing this is the ability to have a goal, and then disconnect from that goal and follow the action steps needed, focus on the steps. So after your coach said that, I'm sure, like, you still felt this emptiness, this like, I'm still not quite what I want to be. But your story continues, because the next day, or maybe a couple days later, you're back in the pool and you're working on what you need to do to continue improving. And I mean, that's the beauty of it, is like, we feel the emotions, we take those emotions, and instead of being like, I'm going to quit, which you most certainly could have, you had all that right, but it's like, I'm going to take this emotion, this hurt, this feeling, and I'm going to use it to throw me back into the pool, to drive me to greatness.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing that I always have to come back to is I love being in water. I always have, I always will. And I tell young athletes, I have parents, talk to me all the time, what is the one thing that my child needs to be a great swimmer? And they need to have fun. That's the bottom line. Like, they need to have fun. If they have fun, they'll do it more. If they do it more, they'll get better results. If they get better results, they'll like it more. If they like it more, they'll do it more. It's just a feedback loop but the core principle is fun. I love challenging myself with people on a daily basis. The community, the social nature of a group of people getting together twice a day to push themselves beyond where they currently stand. That was what was irresistible to me. I wasn't a great competitor. I suffered from performance anxiety, but yeah, to be honest, like with armed with that information of no one remembers an age group champion and the patience that was required, it gave me a lot of confidence because at no point did my coach say, "Hey, you're not training hard enough." Do you know what I
Right.
mean? So by him saying it's only a matter of time, that belies that I am doing the right things. So okay, I can wait, right? Like I'm sure there were waypoints along the way where I got a little glimpse of, oh, I want a local meet. Man, that's a new experience. And I still remember in Adelaide when I came fourth, the number of coaches that came up to me after the race and said, "Man, if that race was 5 meters longer, you would have won." I still remember those words. That's
Yeah.
34 years ago. I still remember that. You know, so
And how did those words, for example, how did they impact you in the moment in shifting the way that you perceived your performance?
look, I mean, if I was to look back, um, I mean, it was definitely exciting for sure.
Yeah.
I was again, I was a pretty cautious kid. Up until I actually felt like I could be successful, like I mentioned, I was pretty cocky, and you know, very sort of ego driven.
Mhm.
And weirdly enough, I don't understand, the psychology behind this, but I would have thought that if that's the way I was and I started to get good results, that the ego would have just exploded, and it didn't. It disappeared. I became an even better trainer. It's like my ego, was being. I thought my ego, if it had been fed the things that would ordinarily grow that ego, that I
Yeah.
thought I'd become this monster, that no one would like, that would just, had a massive head on his shoulders, but it actually worked the reverse of that. Um, so yeah, I still remember coaches to this day, their names and
Yeah.
the things that they said, um, and yeah, I mean those little things that when you're at that age in that stage of your development, they are, you know, they are fuel for you to feel good about yourself, because I was in the wilderness for probably 18 months, 2 years. Um, but if I had my time over again, there's no way I would have it any other way because of the physical disadvantages that I had, it forced me to be even better at the technical skills based things.
Mhm.
And I still remember heaps of kids when I turned 14, 15, 16, that you turn up to a meet and they disappeared. They're not there anymore. It's like, where'd he go?
Yeah.
And my coach would say, well, he didn't respect the things that you respected because he had another advantage, which was physical, right? So I had no choice but to be the best at starts and turns and technique, and because I had no other assets. But
Yeah.
when the playing field was level, it happened so quickly. I went past these kids so quickly that there's just nothing that they could do about it. So they left the sport.
Brilliant. I can feel that because like we're all through our journeys in this life, we're all met with disadvantages or we perceive them as disadvantages, but they're opportunities for growth because it's like we're put in these positions because there's things that we need to learn that are going to propel us when the time is right. So just the illustration of that, like it gets my energy going. And as you were talking of ego, I was tapping into so Wayne Dyer would describe ego better than anyone else. And he said ego is edging God out, right? The ego. And the way you described that was almost like you were expecting to have this really big head when you started becoming good. But ultimately you were tapping into the essence of who you were, which was expanding, which was then drowning out the ego, right? So the psychology of it is the cockiness potentially could be coming in because you're trying to hide something because you're like, I want you to see me, right? And then when you started becoming who you know you could be, the ego wasn't needed anymore. And it's like, you can hang out over here. And that is beautiful, man. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I will add something else. We had amazing leadership in our squad, and mate, the amount of times something stupid would come out of my mouth at 12 or 13 to a 15, 16, 17-year-old, and I would just be ragdolled under the water, or I mean, I'll completely out myself. Sometimes the boys just would pick me up and throw me in the urinal trough, just straight in. There's your lesson, It's like you think about it, you're like, oh, that's so disgusting. But the stupid thing was, it happened multiple times, so it took me a long time to learn my lesson.
Yeah.
But I think boys need that. It's I liken it to a similar fear to that healthy fear that you have for your father. I had a healthy fear of these men because they were good men, and or older teenagers, but they also, they were modeling the behavior as a person and as an athlete
Yeah.
that you had to do if you wanted to be successful. So they weren't mouthing off at other people. So all of a sudden, Josh stops mouthing off.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. So leadership developed through observation of
yeah,
which, happens in multiple facets of our life, and sports are great for that when you're around. I mean, well, it can be great leadership or toxic leadership. You can
yeah,
experience both, right? I love that. And my love for swimming as a sport is the complexity of it's an individual sport at a
yeah,
team level. So you still have the team, but man, this is all about like inflection and introspection, and like it's a constant, how do I make me better, which then makes us better.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky because I sort of came on the scene. After the Atlanta Olympics, I just missed that team, and swimming had a purple patch in Australia, uh, primarily or initially on the men's side, and then the women started to dominate and still dominate to this day. But I remember Kieran Perkins, and I would do anything for him to notice me. Like, and it's not just the other swimmers in my stroke that were senior to me. I just wanted to be known by them, and if we went on a training camp, I'd just try that little bit extra to do something that this. You see what that little 15-year-old did? Like,
Yeah.
and that's the wonderful thing because I had an idol, Chris Feidler, who was in my squad. He was one of the boys that was throwing me in the urinal, and he was on the national team for probably 10 years, maybe 11 years. But we had multiple men: Kieran Perkins, Matthew Dunn, Chris Feidler, Daniel Kowalski. We had these guys that were sort of half a generation beyond, that were the epitome of what a 16 to 20-year-old becoming a man athlete needed. And that went through till 2004. We had some people retire in 2000. We had some more people retire in 2004. And it's interesting what happened beyond that point, because the nucleus of leadership, not just at the athlete level, but the coaching level as well, really lost its way. And as a result, one cycle later, and for the next two Olympics, Beijing and London, there was all sorts of personality, behavioral inadequacies that, to be honest, cost swimmers gold medals. There's no other way of saying it. So I've been involved in it when it's a positive thing, but I've also been one step removed, watching the I guess becoming enamored with the good times and not thinking that those times will ever disappear. And sure enough, they do. And if you're not ready for it, you can spend 8 years in the wilderness, which is what Australian swimming did.
Mm. And So you had the value of seeing both sides of the leadership,
Yeah,
and you saw the opposite side about the time that you were retiring. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so when I met you, you were doing a clinic. Our daughter was in the clinic, and there was a couple of things that caught me like right off the bat. First of all, I already said your storytelling, but it was not the actual storytelling. It was the meanings that were interwoven, and you were teaching these like young teenagers, right? And I mean, all the way through to like quantum physics, right? And like how your body is not just itself, but it's interacting with the water and everything around it. Like, man, I didn't have that growing up. I didn't learn like quantum mechanics, quantum physics until, a few years ago. But also, like, I saw you, someone asked a question of how you do something, and you're like, oh, let me show you. And you hopped in the water. Those two things, I was like, this is interesting. And so, with that, like that highlights to me a value proposition that, a lot of coaches don't hone into. So I'm gathering just the little bit that I've known you is from that pivot, from that time of retiring, seeing this opposite of leadership that you saw. How from there did you become the Josh Watson that is impacting young performers' lives?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I'm not sure whether I've voiced this at the clinic. One of the things I'll often say in a clinic is you really should listen to what I have to say, not because I know stuff, but because I'm going to teach you stuff that I wish I had have done if I had have been swimming. So, I just am a curious person. I'm going to be a lifelong learner for sure. Um, but I guess, you know, there's probably two ways to answer that, and I'm okay with sharing this. But when I was, where did this ego come from? And when I was like 5, 6, up to about 11 or 12, I was suffered from abuse from a family member, and without saying what kind, the worst
Yeah.
kind, and so my sense of self was deflated. So the only way that I could survive each day, and not survive as far as taking my life or anything like that, but the only way that I could uh, maybe get retribution, or to just to stump up each day and have a reasonable day, was my ego. It overcompensated for the personal, I guess, damage that had been caused.
Right.
And that's where, this ego, and for the longest time, I wish I never had it. And, as I mature, I'm like, thank the Lord I had that, because I might not be here. Right.
Right. Right.
Um, so, and, I grew up Catholic. We went to church mainly to appease my grandma. I was an altar boy. I did all that sort of stuff. Never really felt like I had a connection with the Lord, because it was an obligation as opposed
Right.
to a decision.
Yeah.
Um, and then, so, when I retired in 2008, I was 31 years of age. Um, I, I was completely lost. And I think if I could give advice to any athletes, I would say, just trust that the skills that you've learnt in sport do have application outside of sport. Your job is to explore where you can start to apply them. And then, once you find that situation, I'm not going to, I can't sit here and say how long it's going to take for you to, find your way and find your
Yeah.
purpose again, but you are certainly on a path to be able to do that. And in 2011, I was just introduced to some people who are now our best friends back in Australia. And I always knew there was something missing. Like I just felt there was gaps, or unfulfilled, like just an unfulfilled like itch that I just couldn't place, and that led to going to church, and I'm not a doubtful sort of person, but when you look at what's happened across the Catholic Church and religious circles, I remember in my mid-20s saying that Jesus is the greatest story ever told, and I was saying that to repair the damage that had been done, even though it wasn't related to religious environment or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I needed to do some repair. I needed some repair on myself, and that's the way I did it. I just went, yeah, you're full of it. You're not real. And just over time, I remember. I mean, I'm not sure, how common this is, but I've been working for the company that I've been working for 12 years now, and I was doing regular trips overseas, and an opportunity had come to move to the States for the same company to start an office over here. And so we're really excited, and so we moved over in January 2019, and it's October 2018, and I am in like going through a trip through America, prospecting, seeing boxing gyms, because it's a boxing equipment company. And so I'm in Chicago, and unbeknownst to me, I've lost my passport. And so I get on the plane with my ID. I had driver's license, get on the plane with my ID, get to Atlanta, realize that I haven't got my passport, but believe that I've lost it in Chicago. So I'm like, okay. And I tell you what, it's amazing when you're put in a crucible like that. There were things that happened in a 4 or 5 day period that I just didn't think I was capable of achieving. And anyway, so then I've got to, get back to Chicago, go back to the MB that I was staying at, go back to the car rental company, and just try and recount my steps. And then you're thinking logistically, because we've got to get home and have a visa appointment with the US consulate and start the logistics of all the documentation, the preparation for getting a visa to come over here. And here I am, we've been building up this process for such a long period of time. And, because of my carelessness, the whole thing's going to fall apart. And I remember being in a downtown hotel in Chicago, just devastated, like just in tears, over my desk. And, every morning I write this is actually this morning's, today's, right? It's about A5 size, and I've got a devotion that I follow. I must have 30 of these books. I don't know how many I've got. But anyway, so I'm there, and up until this point, I was inconsistent. I did 2 days a week, 3 days a week. God just wasn't a foundation in my life. And I just remember, I don't know how many pages I wrote. I don't even know how long I wrote for, but I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And what I realized at that moment is I gave my heart to him. And at that point, like, just a peace came over me that I can't explain. Even to the point where, the Holy Spirit said to me the next morning, you need to go back to O'Hare Airport and go and see, I think Thrifty was the car company, the rental company. You need to go and see if they've got your passport. He goes, but they don't have it, but you've still got to go and do it. Right. So, the airfare, like, all of the additional expense, and I had to get an emergency passport. We're talking like $1,500, $2,000 which is a lot of money for us back then.
Yeah.
But the obedience, like, and along the way there, I'm in the Uber, like, are you sure it's not going to be there? Can you just mix things up a bit and just, end this for me? And no, you just got, in the way that only the Spirit can, to be spending $100 each way, again, more money on a futile exercise. Well, you think it's a futile exercise, right? yes, it was futile from a fleshly standpoint in that, no, you've got to go there, mate, and your passport's not going to be there. But we had a great time last night when you poured your heart out to me, but this is just step one. This is a step in obedience, and you need to show me that 24 hours later, I still have it. And, didn't find my passport, got home on a Friday morning, went to the Australian consulate in Brisbane, got an emergency passport, flew down to Sydney Sunday afternoon, had our meeting at the consulate Monday morning, got our visa, and then 4 weeks later, we're in America. We've been here ever since. So, I remember for the longest moment in my swimming career, when you look at, I had a good swimming career. I could have been a way better swimmer. And for the most part, I thought, because if I hadn't have been abused like I was as a child, what was the impact on me as a person, me as an athlete, blah, blah, blah. And honestly, the number of times I nearly punched someone in the face by hearing, when you find out the reason why adversity happens to you, and then you have an outlet to do something with it, you'll be thankful for it. And I'm like, yeah, but mate, you don't know what's happened to me. Right. Like, I could say stuff to you that you would go, that's pretty tough. But in the end, it's true. Like what you saw on pool deck. And I say, people, we've spoken a little bit about some of the business ideas that I have.
Yeah.
And, when you're a swimmer and you feel like you have a technical breakthrough, the last thing you're going to do is tell someone else. It's like, no, that's mine. And I swam with my best mate. We lived together. But if I said, hey, I think we should swim backstroke like this, for his benefit, forget about it. And I remember coming to the realization that, God has I have a covenant, or God has a covenant with me. It will happen. Irrespective of what I do, what I don't do, it will happen. And, sometimes when you feel like you've got a unique idea, you're cautious for the world to know, because you're like, well, what if they steal it? Or what if they see it, experience it, and one up me and do it better? And when I realized that all the way, I don't know how far back in my life, certainly way before God became a part of it, and the abuse is part of my story, right? I mean, this will blow your mind. Like, I didn't swim to be a good swimmer. Swimming was something that protected me from the damage of what happened to me as a child.
Ooh.
Right? It was a bubble. It was something that gave me focus. It was something that protected me. I was, and men are great at this, but all males are great at this. Swimming was a gift from God, so that I stayed in a narrow channel to survive long enough to get to where I am in my life. Because I look at, the abuse that I suffered. I look at, an absent dad. I look at a broken first marriage. I look at an amazing wife and 2 kids, 6 years in another country, no help, no family, nothing. We've done it all on our own. And when I look at what God has blessed me with, as far as this opportunity to impact young kids that want to become athletes, I have no reason whatsoever to be fearful, because yes, God has a covenant with me. But in real terms, it's like, you want to be as good as I am at this? Great. Go back to 6 years of age and track everything that happened to me in my life. When it happened, it sucked. When I saw the impact of it, I wish it never had have happened. But I'm now at the point where I'm like, thank the Lord that happened. And I've said that to my mom, like, being abused was a gift from God. I mean, I'm now that person going, thank you for letting that happen, as horrific as it was.
Man. Guys, if you are enjoying this conversation as much as I am, please come back for part 2, and we're going to continue on where we left off and dive even deeper into this because I'm loving this conversation. So I'll see you next time for part 2. Thank you for joining me on Pep Talks with Eric, where together we shift our focus, brace connection, and drive towards a more fulfilling life. Remember, it's not just about where you're headed, but how you choose to travel along the way. As you continue your journey, know that you have the power to change lanes and focus on the path that leads to positivity, purpose, and connection. Let's stay connected and continue empowering your journey one commute at a time. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. And until then, be well, be loved.